Some people think that money can buy anything. They think that as long as their bank account is full, they can treat people like trash, including their own family. I used to believe that too. I believed that by giving my son everything he ever asked for, I was being a good father. But I was dead wrong. My name is Raymond Parker. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how my $14 million empire almost destroyed my family, and how a brutal accident finally opened my eyes to the truth. To understand what happened, you need to know where I came from. I wasn't born into wealth. In fact, I grew up in a tiny, rundown apartment in South Memphis. 31 years ago, I started Parker Logistics with nothing but one beat-up, leased flatbed truck and a mountain of debt. I worked 18-hour days. I missed birthdays, I missed anniversaries, and I poured every drop of my physical and mental energy into building that business. I skipped meals so I could pay my drivers. I stood out in the freezing rain and the blistering heat to make sure the cargo was loaded correctly. Fast forward to today, and that single truck has turned into a massive regional freight company with a fleet of over 150 trucks. Today, the business is conservatively valued at over $14 million. I had achieved the American dream. But in the process of building that dream, I failed at my most important job, being a father. I have two sons, or at least two boys that I raised. First, there's Gary. Gary is my biological son, my flesh and blood. Since his mother passed away when he was young, I felt a massive wave of guilt for working so much. To overcompensate for my absence, I gave Gary everything. If he wanted a new car, I bought it. If he wanted to go on an expensive spring break trip with his friends, I paid for it. I spoiled him rotten. I turned him into a man who didn't know the value of a single dollar because he had never worked a day in his life to earn one. After he graduated from college with a degree he barely used, I set him up with a monthly allowance of $6,000 just so he could live comfortably without stressing. I thought I was being a loving father. In reality, I was building a monster. Then there is Turner. Turner is my nephew, my late sister Maggie's son. Maggie passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm when Turner was just 9 years old. He had no father in the picture and no other living relatives, so I took him in. Turner was the exact opposite of Gary. While Gary demanded the best clothes and the newest gadgets, Turner would sit quietly in the kitchen, doing his homework and asking if he could help me with the dishes. When both boys grew up, I offered them both positions at Parker Logistics. Gary took a high-paying executive title, but rarely showed up to the office, spending his time at country clubs and golf courses. Turner, on the other hand, refused a desk job. He told me, "Uncle Ray, I want to learn the business from the bottom up." He put on a uniform and went to work on the loading docks in the sweltering heat. He learned how to drive the big rigs, how to manage the inventory, and how to deal with angry clients. He worked harder than anyone else in the company, and he never once asked me for a raise or a special favor. But despite Turner's loyalty and hard work, I still favored Gary. Gary was my blood. He was the one I planned to leave the company to. I told myself it was to keep the peace and to keep the family legacy alive. I chose to ignore Gary's arrogance and selfishness. I chose to ignore the way he looked down on Turner as just another hired hand. I chose to stay blind until the universe forced my eyes open.
The crash and the ultimate betrayal. It was a gloomy Tuesday evening in mid-October. The rain was pouring down in Memphis, making the roads slick and dangerous. I was leaving the office late, around 6:40 p.m., driving my usual route home. I was tired, thinking about the upcoming holiday season and how I was going to manage the business as I got older. I came to the intersection of Poplar Avenue and East Parkway. The light was green for me. I proceeded through the intersection at a safe speed, but out of nowhere, a massive commercial delivery truck ran a blatant red light from the crossing street. I didn't even have time to slam on my brakes. The sound of metal crushing metal was deafening. Glass shattered everywhere, and the impact sent my car spinning across the wet asphalt. Airbags deployed, filling the car with smoke and the smell of chemicals. Then, everything went pitch black. When I finally opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I was staring at a sterile white ceiling. The smell of antiseptic filled my nose, and the steady, annoying beep of a heart monitor echoed in the room. I was at the hospital. The pain hit me all at once. It felt like a freight train had parked on my chest. A young doctor came in and explained the damage. 3 broken ribs, a fractured right wrist, and a severely bruised kidney. Every single breath I took felt like someone was shoving a hot iron rod into my side. The doctor told me I was incredibly lucky to be alive, but I would need to be hospitalized for several days to monitor the internal bleeding. I was terrified, exhausted, and completely alone. With my left hand, I shakily reached for my cell phone on the bedside table. I needed my family. Naturally, I called Gary first. He was my son, my pride and joy. I expected him to panic, to ask what hospital I was in, and to race over to hold my hand. Gary picked up on the second ring. In the background, I could hear upbeat music and the clinking of glasses. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" Gary said, his voice sounding annoyed, as if I was interrupting something important. "Gary," I wheezed, fighting through the sharp pain in my ribs. "I've been in a bad car accident. I'm in the hospital. I need you to come here." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't a shocked silence or a worried silence. It was the silence of someone doing mental calculations. "Wow, Dad, that's heavy," Gary finally said, his voice completely flat. Is it life-threatening?" "No, the doctors say I'm stable for now, but I'm in a lot of pain and I have broken ribs and internal injuries," I replied, my voice breaking. "I really need you here, son." That's when Gary uttered the words that I will remember for the rest of my dying days. He sighed audibly into the phone and said, "Look, Dad, here's the thing. Lucy and I leave for the Maldives tomorrow morning. We booked this incredible 5-star overwater bungalow months ago. If we cancel inside of 24 hours, we lose the entire deposit. Thousands of dollars, Dad. Plus, Lucy already spent the whole day packing and she's super excited." I listened, unable to breathe, as my own son continued. "Since the doctors said you're stable and you're going to be fine, there isn't really much I can do sitting in a hospital chair anyway. You have doctors and nurses taking care of you. How about we go on our trip, and I promise we will call you every couple of days to check in. Get some rest, okay? You work too hard anyway." And with that, he hung up the phone. I just stared at the ceiling as tears began to roll down my face, mixing with the sweat on my forehead. For 9 years, I had handed this boy $6,000 a month. I paid for his wedding, his car, and his mortgage. And when I was lying in a hospital bed with broken bones and a bleeding kidney, a non-refundable vacation deposit meant more to him than his own life's life. He didn't disown me with legal papers. He disowned me with his complete lack of empathy.
I lay there in the dark hospital room for another hour, feeling a level of loneliness I had never experienced before. I had built a multi-million-dollar business, but as a father, I was a complete failure. I had raised a boy who valued money over human life. At around 8:30 p.m., the door to my room opened quietly. I expected it to be a nurse coming to check my vitals, but it wasn't a nurse. It was Turner. He was still wearing his blue Parker Logistics work jacket. His face was smudged with grease from working on the loading docks, and his eyes were heavy with exhaustion from a long day of physical labor. He didn't make a big, dramatic entrance. He didn't cry or scream. He just walked over to the side of my bed, looked at my bandaged wrist and the oxygen tubes in my nose, and sat down in the plastic visitor's chair. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, and looked me directly in the eyes. He asked just 4 words. "What do you need?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "How did you find out, Turner?" "Mrs. Pettigrew from your street saw the ambulance on Monday night and called the dispatch office at the yard this morning," Turner said quietly. "I couldn't get away from my shift until now. I came as fast as I could. Have you eaten?" I whispered, "I'm not hungry." You need to eat to heal, Turner said firmly, but gently. He stood up. The hospital food looks terrible. I'm gonna go down to that 24-hour deli on Madison and get you some soup. No mushrooms, right? I know you still hate mushrooms. I watched him walk out of the room. He had been working since 6 a.m., but he didn't care about his own hunger or exhaustion. He had simply shown up. For the next 3 days, Turner never left my side. He took a leave of absence from work. He slept in that uncomfortable plastic chair. He helped me get to the bathroom. He argued with the nurses when my medication was late, and he kept me company. He didn't perform his love. He just lived it. By Thursday morning, my physical pain was manageable, but my mind was made up. I realized that keeping Gary as the sole heir in the name of bloodline was the biggest mistake of my life. I called my longtime estate attorney, Arthur Simmons. Arthur was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had been handling my legal affairs for over 20 years. I asked him to come to my hospital room immediately and to bring my current will. Arthur arrived at 2 p.m. and laid out the 17-year-old document on my rolling hospital tray. According to that paper, upon my death, Gary would inherit 100% of my estate, including Parker Logistics and all its assets. "Tear it up, Arthur," I said, pointing to the document with my left hand. "We are drafting a brand new will today." Arthur looked at me with deep concern. "Raymond, are you sure? You've suffered a major trauma. Maybe you should wait until you were discharged to make such massive decisions." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied, my voice filled with a cold certainty. "I am going to leave 70% controlling interest of Parker Logistics to Turner." Arthur paused, his pen hovering over his legal pad. "And what about Gary?" "Gary gets the lake house in Tennessee. It's worth about $400,000. It's fully paid off. That is more than enough for a son who wouldn't even cancel a vacation to see if his father was dying," I stated firmly. "The remaining 30% of the company will be placed in a trust for the South Memphis Children's Literacy Foundation. That's where Turner's mother used to volunteer. It's what she would have wanted." Arthur looked at me for a long moment, saw the resolve in my eyes, and nodded. "All right, Raymond, let's get to work." It took us 2 hours to draft the new 17-page document. When it was finished, I signed it with a shaky left-handed signature. I also wrote a private letter to Gary, which I sealed in an envelope, and told Arthur to have a courier delivered to Gary's house on Friday morning. I knew Gary was scheduled to return from his shortened trip, because my accountant had already followed my orders to freeze Gary's $6,000 monthly allowance. I knew Gary would come running the moment the money stopped. Sure enough, on Friday afternoon, the storm arrived. I was sitting up in my hospital bed, and Turner was in the chair eating a sandwich. Suddenly, the door to my room flew open with a loud bang. There stood Gary. He was still wearing his expensive linen resort clothes, looking sun-kissed and tanned from the Maldives. Behind him was a trail of expensive luggage. He looked absolutely furious. He didn't even notice Turner standing in the corner. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Gary yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet hospital wing. "I just got back and my debit card was declined at the airport. Ben, your accountant, said you ordered him to freeze my monthly transfer. Are you out of your mind?" I looked at my biological son. He looked exactly like me at that age. But where I saw determination in my own old photos, I saw nothing but greed and entitlement in him. "Calm down, Gary," I said quietly. "You're in a hospital." "Don't tell me to calm down. I had to fly back early because my card stopped working, and Ben dropped a hint that you met with Arthur yesterday to change the will. Tell me that's not true, Dad. Tell me you didn't cut me out." I looked at him calmly. "It's true, Gary. I rewrote the will. Parker Logistics now belongs to Turner. He will take over as CEO when the time comes." Gary froze. He slowly turned his head and looked at Turner, who was standing quietly, holding his sandwich. Gary's face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. "This orphan?" Gary screamed, pointing a finger at Turner. "You are giving my multi-million-dollar empire to this charity case loading dock worker? He isn't even your real son." I looked at Gary, and for the first time, I felt no guilt. I felt only clarity. "You're right, Gary," I said, my voice ice-cold. "Turner isn't my biological son. But while you were thousands of miles away sipping drinks by a pool because a vacation deposit meant more to my life, this charity case was sitting in that plastic chair for 3 days. He cleaned up my food, he helped me walk, and he actually cared if I lived or died." Gary stammered, realization finally washing over his face. "Dad, I didn't think it was that serious. You said you were stable." "And that was all you needed to hear to abandon me. I love you, Gary. I will always love you. You are my son, but I am officially done paying for the privilege of your attention. You will get the lake house in Tennessee. You can live there, or you can sell it and get a job. But as far as my company and my wealth go, you are finished." Gary stared at me, his mouth agape. He looked at Turner, then back at me, realizing that no amount of throwing a tantrum was going to work this time. He grabbed his designer suitcase and stormed out of the hospital room without saying another word. He had traded a $14 million future for a week on a tropical beach. I handed Turner the company because he earned it, and as I lay there, finally feeling at peace, I knew that the debt to my late sister was finally settled. Real family isn't determined by a DNA test. It's determined by who stands by your side when the world crashes down around you.